On this episode, the final episode in Series 1, myself and my co-host Mark Fallon discuss the findings of our recent survey on attracting and retaining talent in a post-pandemic working world, as employers prepare for the return to the office. Over 90 employers in financial services across Ireland and the UK took part in our survey, in which 96% stated that they believe offering opportunities like remote or hybrid working will act as a competitive advantage in talent attraction and retention post-COVID-19. While 9 in 10 employers plan to make increased flexible working arrangements available to employees on returning to the office, 64% fear this may result in a loss of culture and office energy. Employers were also asked about their expectations for returning to the office. Of those that are planning to return, 67% feel confident that it will happen this year, 54% expect that they will have to make adjustments to their office spaces, and nearly a third are planning to downsize or offer employees access to digital or remote working hubs. 89% will offer hybrid working post-pandemic, up from 26% prior to the pandemic, with the majority favouring a 2 or 3 or 3 or 2 hybrid working model. Interestingly, there is little appetite amongst employers in financial services to implement a form of structured flexibility, in which there are dedicated office-based days for all employees to be in the office. On this episode, myself and Mark also reflect on the previous episodes, speakers and topics covered in the series, before providing our thoughts, opinions and predictions for the return to the office in the financial services market, both in Ireland and the UK. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Andrew.
How's everything? You're all relaxed after your trip to Cork, eh?
I certainly am. Nice time away, nice break, great sunshine. Great to be back at work though, you know.
We're delighted to have you back, that's for sure.
Good stuff.
So obviously this is the last episode and we're doing a little bit differently. Why don't I maybe start by asking you what your favourite episode of the first series was?
My favourite episode, you put me on the spot here, Andrew. I suppose, first and foremost, it's been a very interesting and exciting thing that we've done here. I suppose the goal of the podcast was to cover a lot of topics. You know, I suppose from the beginning we did do a focus group to see what people wanted to see and hear, and you know the overall feedback was that they wanted to hear both of us and they wanted us to speak about macro conditions. And I think we covered a lot of really good topics over the course of the year. You know, obviously with Per starting off with the sustainable revolution, that was very, very topical at the time and it still is today. I suppose even when we were speaking about it, probably wasn't as much in the media as ESG is now and how sustainable investing is actually moving forward. So I think when we did promote that, it was just at a time when it was just really coming into the mass market. Then obviously with Kevin then afterwards, you know, we got very much on the technical side of things around risk and regulation. And that was, again, a very interesting topic, especially for people working in the banking sector. So again, for any of our audience in that area, you know, I'm sure it did appeal to them. Fiona DeLacy from Walkers at the time, brilliant again. I suppose that was more focused on, you know, I suppose working remotely and how people have adapted. So again, quite topical at that time. And then obviously with Jesus and, you know, talking about the fintech and insurtech industry. So that's very much, you know, at the forefront of everyone's minds, how that's developing. And then we remember myself and yourself, we decided that we'd take more of a different approach and speak to people more from a D&I background. So I remember, obviously, we spoke with Siobhan Sweeney as well, and she was fantastic. What a star, really. And we really had a really good conversation with her. And then we said, you know, at the time, let's move into, you know, talk with Stan Barnes within the aircraft leasing sector, because they've obviously gone through a tough time over the last 12 months. And again, that was focusing on adaptability and how these guys have transitioned from, you know, what was quite a very buoyant market into a very tough and challenging times for that sector, you know. So it's really good to sit down and stand. So, you know, obviously you did the UK ones as well. What was your thoughts on those ones?
Yeah, everything you just kind of said, I would agree with. I think when we looked at doing the UK episodes, it was obviously to engage people in that market and have a look at, you know, certain topics that were very important also. And I think we kind of mirrored some of the Irish topics in that regard. So you look at kind of the fintech, and we got Charmin on to talk about, you know, the regulations within the fintech sector and how that's evolving to keeping up with the changes in fintech and the disruption that they're doing. Then we got Mike on to talk about, you know, the financial reporting and reporting requirements as, you know, companies take on kind of further ESG requirements from kind of an asset owner perspective. And then obviously we had Mariam then from BWAM to talk again about that D&I piece. So a lot of kind of similar topics in a different market with different viewpoints. I think for me, though, the first series, what I've really kind of enjoyed from it is that you get to speak to people and understand certain perspectives as the world's changing. So if you look at regulation, if you look at DE&I, if you look at the COVID impact, it's had its effect and the world is changing and people are having to adapt and evolve, and getting to hear that feedback and their stories and how they're dealing with things and what they're seeing. I think that's just really what I've enjoyed the most, and having the platform to really do that. But I suppose you didn't really give me your answer, so I'm going to go put you back on the spot to ask you, because you're not getting away with it that easy. Which one was your favourite?
I'm not picking any favourites. I'm being very diplomatic here. They're all excellent speakers, and we thank them all for their time, and we thank them for everything that they've done for us. And we've been very grateful for them to take their time out of their busy schedules. So. But overall, no, it's been exciting.
If you weren't in recruitment, Mark, you'd be a politician, huh?
I would not move into politics. No, thank you. I prefer to stay in recruitment. Thank you very much.
So looking ahead, then, obviously, we're 6 months in, just finished H1. Things seem to be getting back to normal. Obviously, the vaccination program's underway, and people are starting to think about getting back into the office and kind of towards the end of this year. We did that report, which I think, just to give the listeners a bit of background, covered the UK and Irish market. We surveyed over 90 financial service institutions of all sizes, ranging from 5 employees to 500 plus employees, to really get their take on how they have not only dealt with the effects of COVID and the pandemic, but how they will look to retain talent, moving forward when we look at kind of flexible working. Really interesting results that came back from that we've obviously distributed out to the market. But from your side, Mark, what do you think, the biggest takeaways were there in terms of kind of, and what we're seeing and hearing as well in our day-to-day jobs? What do you think, professionals in financial services ultimately want moving forward?
To echo exactly what you just said there, when we were speaking to people on the market, it was the first thing that was popping up in everyone's minds about what's going to be the working from home policy, when we do return to the office. So we just felt at the time, when we were speaking to loads of industry leaders like HR directors, CFOs, CEOs and whatnot, that, they really wanted to find out information about what other people were doing in financial services. That's, obviously the reason why we ran it. To answer your question, the feedback on the survey is that the majority of companies will be looking to implement some sort of flexibility, right? And what we're seeing a lot of is probably a 2 and a 3, or either a 3 and a 2, okay? Whereby 2 days in the office, 3 from home, or 3 days in the office and 2 from home, right? What we saw from 1 or 2 interesting companies, without naming any, and I think this is actually quite an interesting way of doing things moving forward, is more around a 2-2-1 model, whereby it would be 2 in the office, 2 from home, and then 1 for a flexi day, whereby, it's at the company discretion and the employee discretion whether or not they actually want to be physically in the office. So we think, from our own experiences, that, that could be a very, very good model, The one, I suppose, major concern and the major red flag around all of this is, it's a question we wanted to ask on the back of the surveys, right? What are the biggest concerns? What are the biggest fears, I suppose, that will face employers, when we do return to the office? And an overriding, I suppose, feedback was that it was going to be loss of company culture and loss of, collaboration. Even from me speaking with clients now, and, people miss that, going over for a coffee, talking to your friend at the coffee machine. People actually miss, if we talk more about the younger people and the junior side of the market, like your newly qualified accountants as an example, they're finding it very difficult to fit in with a company when they're leaving a Big Four practice potentially, or coming into the workforce, for the very first time, and they're not getting that hands-on managerial oversight, and that's a huge loss. So I think over the last couple of months and even the last couple of weeks, the media have been really influencing how people's perceptions on the return to the office is going to be. And I think it's somewhat distorted, if I can say that, because I feel that the majority of people want to get back into the office, and again, we're specifically talking about financial services here. So, anyone who I speak to, they want flexibility, but at the same time, they want to be in the office 2, 3, 4 days a week. They do. Now, it's different for people commuting long distances and so forth. But like if you're in half an hour journey within your office, physical office, people will be willing to come in there 3 days a week. Whereas if you're further afield, then it might be a different story. But again, the areas that we recruit in across accounting, finance, risk compliance, front office, the majority of those people physically want to be in the office, And I'm talking here from an Irish perspective. What did you see from the UK side of things, Andrew?
Yeah, I don't think you can speak for everybody, and everybody's situation is different in some regards. But I think the overall perception, if that's the right term to use, from the UK is that I think people obviously have enjoyed the slowing down of life in some regards, the not getting on the tube, not going into the city all the time. But I don't get the sense, kind of when I look in comparison to, say, the Irish market, that there's that overarching need to have to be having a flexible policy. I think people, like what you were just saying, want to get back into the office. I think they enjoy the flexibility, and if that's continued, I think that's what they'll ultimately want to see. But I don't get the sense it's going to be as much of, if I don't get that, I'm not going to take that job. I think people are probably just a little bit more relaxed around the whole situation. I think you probably see a lot of people going back into the office. Obviously, some of the bigger institutions like a Goldman and a Morgan Stanley have come in and said, look, we want our staff back in the office full time. And I mean, even if you look around you, again, in the UK and in Ireland, there's a huge amount of development going into these office spaces. So, you do ask yourself, what are they going to fill them with if people are all working from home? So I think you're going to find that the clients in the UK probably are going to be a little bit more wanting the staff to come back with the flexibility of on offer and then there. But I just get the sense as well that there's not going to be as much structure in terms of kind of that structured flexibility of these are office days, these are home days, 3 and 2, 2, 2 and 1. I think some firms will adopt it, but I don't think you're going to see it kind of nationwide or London market wide, which I know in the Irish market probably is a little bit different. Obviously, there's legal pieces in place around kind of the right to ask to work from home and work remotely. So you may find, and maybe you'll agree, that you probably will see more structured flexibility in Ireland than maybe what you'd see in the UK. What do you think?
Yeah. But like, do you see? I'm going to put a question back at you now. Do you see companies, in the UK going back to a full 5 day per week in the office, or is it going to be
again our focus in the UK market very much is on the asset investment management industry. A lot of firms that we work with are a boutique in size, and just from speaking to the CEOs and the heads of, they're saying, look, we'd like to have people back, and we want people to be together. If they need flexibility, we'll absolutely support that. But I do get the sense that wanting them to be together is there. And then again, look, you've got the companies that are in the media that are coming out and putting that statement in place. But again, it's not the majority. I'd say there will be firms that will put in the 2 and 3 hybrid, but I just don't get the sense it's maybe going to be as widely adopted as here.
Yeah. See, I think on that point, right, and again, it's the buzzword at the moment, flexibility, right? So a lot of companies will be asking themselves the question, what is flexibility in our company? Because I think realistically, the way the world has changed in terms of how we work, from an office perspective, again, we're talking about office workers here, is that people have been working from home for so long now that it's just going to become the norm in terms of, let's say, for example, you're working from home on a Monday and Friday, you will adapt your working world around those days. And when you get back into the office, the social aspect will come back to your role again. But the point I'm making is that the hours that people are going to be working from here on in, it's never going to be a 9 to 5. And that's where the flexibility has to come from companies, whereby it's not going to be, a 9 to 5. We're having a login meeting at 9 a.m. in the morning. I think that day could be long gone. I think there could be a core working hour of between 10 a.m. to maybe 4 p.m. whereby anything up to that point is flexible. Do you know what I mean? Now, I know there is a couple of companies in Dublin actually doing that already, but the majority of them wouldn't be. And I think that's probably the way it's going to go, because like, as for both of us, we've got a young family, we have to do school drop-offs in the morning and so forth. It's going to be very difficult for us to implement a strategy around flexibility when we're not inflexible ourselves, you know. So I can see that being, if let's say, for example, if a company doesn't, let's say, can't commit to giving a person, let's say, 3 days in the office or whatever they're looking for potentially, that they can be flexible. They can say, look, you've got a young family or you've got other commitments. You know, if you want to, log in every day, from 9:30 a.m. onwards, and then these are your core hours up until 4:30, and all the tasks that's outlined for you to do essentially are hit, then that's your day's work done, right? So, it probably will move into that task orientated focus rather than being, clock watching, for want of saying.
Will companies, and here's an important point, and obviously we'll have to see how it plays out, but will companies, or are companies already losing people if they don't commit to putting something structured in place? Like if we're talking about, okay, we can't commit to giving you these set days, but we'll be flexible on your time. Is that going to be enough, or is there an expectation, whether it be through, as you said, maybe the media influence or just overall what people want? Are companies going to lose, or are they losing people if they don't commit to something?
It's a loaded question, Andrew. Yeah. I professionally think that they will lose. Yeah, they will. Because what's going to happen is you're going to have a company that will, implement a policy. And unfortunately, it's not going to fulfill everyone's requirements. And what will happen is that your employee will essentially go, right, if you can't do this for me, I'll go to your neighbour and ask them, can they do it for me instead? But what happens there is, I have a feeling what's going to happen is people are going to be influenced by the media, are going to be going, just got remote working here and there. But when, a person actually goes out into the market and sees what's actually available to them, then they might be quite surprised that it's much the same. It's all determined, like the grass is always greener on the other side, but sometimes it's actually not. And I think that may be a case that probably will happen over time, because every company will want to implement flexibility. There's only a select few that we know of that are going to be somewhat being a little bit more rigid, if you can use that term, or restrictive in terms of the 5 days a week in the office, And it's those companies I would genuinely be more concerned about, because, anyone who's going to not implement some element of flexibility will 100% lose talent. I think if a company does implement some element of flexibility, as we've just outlined, then they'll be in a better place.
To kind of refine that then, and you're saying, look, if I can't get that here, I'm going to go to your neighbour, with the expectation that that neighbour can meet those requirements. But kind of bringing it back, what's the biggest takeaways? What do companies, do you think, in Ireland anyway, need to be able to do to ensure that people aren't going to their neighbour?
It depends. It's an open question again. Like, I kind of somewhat feel some empathetic towards HR professionals at this moment in time, because they're going to have to do a risk assessment on each individual employee. It's as simple as that, and understand what their, motivations are, understand what they are looking for in terms of flexibility. And I find that these HR directors, HR managers are really going to have to dig deep into each employee and find out exactly what they want, Now, like if you're dealing with a company with 2,000 people, or, it's going to be a lot harder to find out each individual person what they want. For smaller companies, that might be a little bit easier, obviously. But again, it's very difficult to say, because, you just literally have to do a risk assessment on each person, find out what they need, what they want, and then all you can do is go from there. I think that the struggle is that for any company, for any team, what you don't want to do is lose your best people, and I think that's where the biggest concern would be for any, employer out there. And then for all employees, you want to make sure your retention rates are quite high. You don't want a large turnover of staff, and you want to keep hiring new people and growth and all that good thing. What would you say about the UK?
Yeah, look, I think this, again, it's just, it's so hard to pin down the key takeaways. I think what's important in the UK and as much as well as Ireland is that, and you've kind of just mentioned it there, that you feel sorry for the HR teams, but there's just so much for companies to have to look at in order to retain their staff. You know, they have to look at defining their policies. They have to look at their technology. They have to look at improving their culture, inclusiveness. They have to look at their benefits. They have to look at how they're going to measure everything, how to create more task oriented output. So there's so much to cover off to enable companies to be hybrid, keep employees satisfied. I think you make an important point that they have to understand at an employee level what's important and just try and get the overall general consensus. Bigger firms are going to have to just go with what they think is best. It's probably, you know, if you've got 2,000, 10,000 employees, you know, big multinationals, can they really do that? Probably not. So, but I think that, you know, the majority of firms that we work with would be kind of those mid-size, you know, couple of hundred, 200-300 employees that it is possible. You get the general consensus, and I think as long as companies are, you know, are trying to do right and do the best for their staff, and they can kind of start to look at those areas over the coming months and maybe even the next couple of years, then, you know, I think employees will respond to that. I don't think it's going to be so much, oh, you're not going to do that for me, I'm out the door straight away. I think there's going to be a transition back into the UK market, and in some respects the UK is going to maybe be a bit ahead of Ireland, so it'll be interesting to see, you know, what trends start to come up there, what issues, and how people do transition back. And I think Ireland maybe will have a bit of luxury to look at the neighbour and say, okay, that's working, that's not, and what can we maybe be doing differently? That's probably somebody in HR calling you now for a bit of advice, is it?
It is. Sorry about that. Oh, good.
Our live podcast going out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's very hard to, and I know I asked you that question first, but it is very hard to say you have to be able to do this, this, and this. I think there's so much to cover. It's kind of seeing how that goes. I mean, what do you think will be the main things that we'll see coming, you know, in the financial services over the coming months now, going up into the end of this year?
In terms of flexibility, is that what you mean, or
just the transition back to the office, and then that? Yeah.
It's going to be a huge change. You know, we ran the webinar there last year about, you know, moving away from the office and what, you know, and again, we spoke to a couple of experts and they said the hardest thing is actually going to be moving back into the office. You know, people are creatures of habit, and for the last 15, 16 months, we've all been working from home, the majority of us, and the people just need to adapt to get back into the office, you know, get back into meetings when that time comes, and seeing how things roll. I think there's going to be a huge period of just climatization, if you can use that word, you know, where people just want to just really see how it feels, what's this going to be like. Is this the company I left? You know, not left, but I'm working for, but now I'm back in here physically. So that I think people will question a lot of things. I think this is what this pandemic has done for a lot of people, is question about, well, you know, what exactly, you know, is this the job I want to do? Am I happy in this company? You know, and I think until people actually physically go back and see people again, that questions will be answered. I think from an employee's perspective, you know, that would be the key thing, really. You know, again, imagine if you're doing a commute like I do, and you're getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you're getting the long, as you do as well, I should say. You're doing that long journey into Dublin. You're kind of like, is it actually worth it? Should I look for something, you know, locally, you know? And that's what people will question that, you know. And we asked the question in our survey: was there going to be, you know, these, you know, localized hubs that's going to be created and so forth? And, you know, there is a couple popping up. I saw recently one in Wexford, one going to be in Mullingar as well. But it'd be interesting to see, do companies actually adopt that? That's basically.
Yeah, I think what we have to be mindful of in the coming months, and maybe more, again, looking at the UK, the fact that I think, you know, something like 97% companies said they weren't going to put structured flexibility in place, that we could easily fall into old habits, you know, if there isn't that structure in place, and people start to go back in 3 days and then 4 days. Do we fast forward in kind of 6, 12, 18 months time and find that we're office based again? I don't think so, but there is always that danger that, you know, without the structured flexibility, that could happen. But look, I think overall, you know, the key things are that businesses will have to find models that work for them based on what service they provide, what size they are. We're going to see split in the market. Companies are going to implement what works for them, and that's either going to work for their current employees, or employees are going to want to maybe gravitate towards businesses that are doing it differently. So there is going to be probably a bit of a shift and dislocation of talent, and then that will settle again, and people and companies will find a new way of kind of how they operate, and that it fits everybody. So I think that's what I would expect to see over the coming months. Is just when we do transition back, it's just everybody's, you say, climatizing again, but then figuring out if this isn't for me, and if companies aren't doing it how I want to, I'm going to go and find someone that fits more with me. That movement happens, and then hopefully, well, for us it's good, but things do settle again. Look, there's probably so many more questions that we could go through, or areas to cover, but we'll have to just wait and see. I think for anybody listening, obviously myself and Mark have kind of just given our thoughts and opinions, but as we mentioned, we did run a survey that gives a lot more factual based information. So if you would like to see that report, you can download that survey on our website. If you are looking to talk to us about what's happening in the financial service market, do reach out to us. Again, if you are starting to define your flexible policy, and you want to see, what that might look like in the market, what we're hearing from people looking, or vice versa, if you're looking yourself and you want to know what companies are potentially going to be doing, then do reach out to us. We're more than happy to give you that insight. This is, as I mentioned, the last episode of Series 1 of Conversations with Coopman. We are returning after a short break over the summer in September with a new series, new guests, new topics that myself and Mark and myself and will be co-hosting. So do keep an eye out for that. We'll be promoting on our channels in due course. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for joining us on Conversations with Coopman. If you are looking to hire excellent talent, or considering your next career move in front office, risk, compliance, or accounting, please reach out to a member of our specialist recruitment team. If you have any questions about the financial services market, feel free to leave a comment below and we will get back to you soon. And if you like this podcast episode, we'd greatly appreciate a video like, or even better, subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with our latest releases.